Hello and welcome to IP Study Video Lectures. Today we will discuss Chapter 4 of Grade 8 Social Science, The Colonial Era in India. In this chapter we will discuss these topics. First, the beginning of colonial age, arrival of Europeans in India, then the foundation of British rule in India, trade, conflicts and battles. After that, expansion of company rule. Then we will discuss about impact of colonial rule in India. Then reshaping India's economy to suit colonial needs. After that, early challenges to establish rule. Then we will discuss about the Great Rebellion of 1857 and last, impact of European colonialism on Indian society. So after Mughal became weak, the Marathas came and ruled the large part of India. But after their arrival, the new power came to India, that is the British. The Britishers came here as a traders, not as a rulers. But step by step, they control trade, wars and politics to control India. They turned India as jewel in the crown of their empire. Here it is. So here is the big question. How did traders from small island thousands of kilometers away rule such a huge and large part like India? This is what we are going to study in this chapter. But before that, we should know what is colonism. Here in the conversation of this girl and the grandma, she is asking her grandma that what is colonism? Colonism is referred to control of one country over another. That means colonism. The stronger country not only establish political power but also controls trade, economy and culture. Colonizers usually set up their own settlement and exploit the resources of other country. That means they use other people's land or other people for their own benefit. That means is colonism. Colonism is not new. Even in ancient history, strong empires expand by conquering neighbors and change their religion. Now that we know the meaning of colonism, let's see the beginning of colonial age. An age of colonism starts in 15th century when European countries begin exploring the world. Countries like Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, Netherlands traveled to Asia, Africa, and the Americans to set up colonies. However, Europeans suddenly tried to capture new lands. Let's understand the reason. Here are the reasons, or we can say causes of colonial expansion. First, we have political rivalry. Political rivalry means each European nation wanted to show that they were the strongest. The more colonies they controlled, the more powerful they look to the world. That means is political rivalry, and it is very important. Now come to the second point, that is economic gain. Another reason was economic gain, which means they wanted wealth. Countries like India has spices, cotton, silk, precious metals, so many things. By controlling colonies, they could take raw material in cheap price and sell finished good in high price. Now third we have is religious motives. Religion too play a crucial role here. Missionaries traveled with them to spread Christianity, believing it was their duty to change people's belief. Fourth, we have scientific curiosity and exploration. That means explorers want to discover new sea, new plants, new animals and learn more about the world. Then we have last the civilizing mission, and very important, Europeans claimed that they came to India, or we can say they colonized other country because they want to civilize other country. According to them, Indians or the countries they colonized are uncivilized or backward. They are civilizing other countries. But in reality, they took our wealth, our freedom, and our culture. Here, students, now look at this picture carefully. This picture carefully in your textbook. This is the famous French magazine cover called Le Petit General. It was printed during the colonial period. Now students, look at this picture carefully from your textbook. This is the famous French magazine cover called Le Petit General. It was printed during the colonial period. So here in the center, this is the woman dressed in white with a French flag colored cloth. She is not a real person actually. She is representing France and French civilization. She holds a horn of plenty, symbolizing wealth, prosperity, and abundance. Around her, here, you see people in traditional North African clothing, shown as kneeling or looking up at her. The painting presents them as needing guidance. That painting depicts that the European published such image to show themselves as heroes, as if they were saving and helping uncivilized people. That is the idea called civilizing mission. Here it is. Now the colonizers said they came to bring education, religion, progress, and civilization. But in reality, they take control, take resources, rule the people for their own benefit. So this image is not showing the truth. It is a fake story colonizers wanted people to believe. Now you understand how Europeans justify colonialism. Before we learnt about the struggle of people, let's see how colonialism spread around the world and how Europeans reached India. So, here is the arrival of Europeans in India. India was famous for its wealth, famous for its skilled craftsmanship, valuable goods since ancient times. Traders from many regions including Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and Chinese travel long distance to buy spices, cotton textile, ivory, pearls, teak wood, gems, and the famous wood steel from India. By the 15th century, from the 16th century, European travelers described India as flourishing land. Next this was the beginning of new phase in Indian history when the subcontinent shifted from being flourishing center of trade to becoming the focus of European colonial ambitions. The famous economic historian Angus Maddison suggests that India contributed nearly 1/4 of the world's GDP during this period, making it, along with China, the largest economy in the world. What is GDP? In the Did You Know section, you have GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It means the total value of all goods and services produced in country in 1 year. You will also study this in your economics class. So now imagine you are a trader in Europe. You keep hearing stories about a land far away from your country that is very wealthy, very beautiful, and have so much rich in culture and so much diversity. Would you like to go there? Yes, of course you will. So that's exactly what Europeans countries did actually that time. Why Europeans came to India? Here is the question arises. European travelers described India as a dream destination, like a rich and the wealthy country. So what Europeans want? They want to come in our country. They see our country as an opportunity. They came here to buy clothes, or we can say buy products in a very cheap rate and sell them in their own country in Europe in very high rates, or we can say they make very much profit there. This began new phase in history where India shifted from being center of trade to becoming a target of European colonial ambitions. So here is the map. Look at this map from the textbook showing European settlements in India from 1498 to 1739. You see different flags here. These flags shows each European power set up trading center in different part of India as you see in this map. First, we come to the Portuguese in India trade and expansion. Now students, let's see with the first European who came to India by sea, the Portuguese. In May 1498, the famous Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama reached Kapad near Calicut on the Malabar coast. He was welcomed by the Zamorin, the local ruler, but soon relations became tense and Portuguese turned aggressive. Here is the image of Vasco da Gama landed at Kozhikode in 1498. The Portuguese wanted complete control of spice trade in India, so they built strong naval bases. In 1510, they captured Goa, which became the capital of their empire in the east. Next, they set up many trading posts along the coast, controlling key sea routes. Now come to the Carters system. What is Carters system? It is to dominate trade. The Portuguese introduced Carters system, a pass, or we can say a license kind of thing. Every ship sailing in Arabian Sea had to carry a Portuguese pass, that is the Carters system. If a ship did not have one, it would be seized and destroyed. This allowed the Portuguese to monopolize the spice trade. Now come to the religious policy and Goa Inquisition. Here is the picture of Goa Inquisition. The Portuguese were also strict about spreading Christianity. In 1560, they introduced Goa Inquisition, a religious code that imposed harsh measures on those accused of practicing non-Christian faiths. A religious code that used harsh punishments for it. Temples were destroyed, people were forced to convert, and many lives in fear that time. Decline of Portuguese power, as they want their dominance in India. So that's why we can say their decline in India is very early. The Portuguese were the strongest naval power in the Indian Ocean during the 16th century. New European powers like Dutch, English, French arrived. The Portuguese became weak and finally controlled only Goa, Daman and Diu. Goa remained in its rule until 1961, when it was integrated into independent India. So here, did you know, Goa remained under Portuguese rule for over 450 years. Now come to the Dutch in India, trade and competition. The Dutch reached India in 17th century. Unlike the Portuguese, they were not interested in spreading religion or anything. They came here to trade only. So their main goal is a commercial profit, especially the spice trade. In 1602, here it is, in 1602, the Dutch set up the Dutch East India Company and opened trading posts on both the coast. Important center including Surat, Bharuch, Cochin on the west, Nagapattinam and Masulipatinam on the east. Their strongest presence was Malabar region of Kerala, where they managed to displace the Portuguese from several coastal trading centers. Then there is a competition and decline of the Dutch. Here is the Dutch control the significant part of the spice trade of some decades. The Dutch, but they faced strong competition from the English. Their decline became clear after the Battle of Kolachil. After the Battle of Kolachil in 1741, where the forces of Travancore under the king Martanda Varma decisively defeated the Dutch both on land and sea. By the 18th century, the Dutch became weak and lost the importance. While Dutch were declining, another European power is emerging that time, that is the French. Now come to the French in India colonial ambitions. The French reached India after Portuguese and Dutch. Their goal is not just trade here, their goal is to control political power in India. They formed French East India Company. They tried to combine trade with political power. Then, here, the first trading post was established at Surat in 1668, followed by Puducherry, present-day Puducherry, or earlier it is Pondicherry. In 1674, Pondicherry soon became the capital of French in India, the base from which they tried to extend their political and commercial control. So now, here is the picture of Joseph Francis Francois Dupleix, the most important French leader. He trained soldiers, supported Indian rulers in battle, and hoped to control India through alliance. Now come to the Carnatic Wars. Here is the picture, surrender of city Madras in 1746. To fight for power between French and the British became clear in Carnatic Wars. The struggle for control became clear in Carnatic Wars in 1746 to 1763, fought between the French and the British in South India. Dupleix initially won victories and even captured Madras in 1746. As you see the structure here, that first Portuguese came, after that Dutch came in India, and then second last we can say French came to India. And everyone's policy is different. Some came here to just for the trade, some came here for the political control, some came here for the trade as well as to spread Christianity. And now we see that limits of French rule. Unlike the Portuguese, the French generally avoid interfering in India's social and religious life. However, an exception occurred in 1748 when Dupleix ordered the destruction of Vedupurishvaran temple in Pondicherry. Under pressure from Jesuit priest and his wife. Then, here is in Did You Know? The French language was officially used in Puducherry until 1954. In last, the Britishers came in India from trade to empire. That is very important that we will discuss in this chapter. How the Britishers colonized the vast country like India. Students, now let's move to the most important European power in Indian history, that is the British. The British in India from trade to empire. The English East India Company also established its presence in 1600s as the time as the Dutch came to India. Like other Europeans, they first came here as a traders, but as we have already discussed that step by step, they controlled on our politics, on our culture, on our economy. At the beginning, the British looked just like other foreign traders, but unlike the others, they slowly and cleverly turned trade into political power. They used mixture, they used the strength of military as well as diplomacy and rivalry between Indian rulers to become powerful. Now let's discuss step by step how Britishers came to India and how the foundation of British rule in India. The British conquest in India is one of the most unusual story in the world history. They came here as a traders, but how they distinguished themselves as trader and what began as commercial venture slowly turned into control of an empire. The East India Company was formed in 1600 when group of merchants in London received a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I. This charter gave the company privilege that no ordinary trader enjoy. It could sign treaties with foreign rulers, establish fort and even maintain its own army for protection. Now, in the early years, the company focused on trade. So, Indian goods such as cotton, textiles, silk or indigo, spices were in great demand in Europe. These items brought huge profit and the company pretended to be only interested in commerce. Then, here is the map, early centers of the trade. Here, first the company set up important trading centers along the Indian coastline. So, here is the Surat, Calcutta, Madras and Bombay. As we can see according to the direction that in all the directions Britishers spread their control. So first Surat, here is the first English factory set up. Then Madras in 1639. So you can also learn this through the timeline. Here is a 1612 Surat. First they set up the factory here. Then Madras in 1639. Here is the major ports. Then in Bombay in 1661. It is a place came under English control as part of dowry of Portuguese Princess Catherine of Braganza, who married King Charles II of England. And last, Calcutta in 1690 became the company's most powerful base here. So Indian rulers didn't see these posts as a threat. Foreign traders has been coming to India for centuries. So at first English seemed harmless, but after that they did not just trade with India but also wanted control over the country. So Indian rulers did not see as a harm for themselves. Foreign merchants had been coming to India for centuries because the Arab, Persian, Central Asians were already part of India's trade network. The English appeared to be just another group of traders. So for Indians, they are just traders. But India didn't know that time that how harmful they were for us. Now come to the hidden ambition of Britishers. Hidden ambition behind the trading, we can say here, behind these modest beginning, lay the company's long-term ambitions. It gradually fortified its settlements, trained Indian soldiers called sepoys, began to interfere in local politics by supporting rival princes or lending military support in succession disputes. The company slowly extended its control, or we can say East India Company slowly, you can say, coming in the internal affairs of the rulers in India. The British conquest of India was not a result of one sudden invasion. It was gradual, calculated, disguised as trade. By combining commerce, diplomacy, military power, the East India Company transformed itself from a group of traders into rulers of vast subcontinent. Here is the picture of 19th century illustration showing officers and sepoys of the English East India Company Madras Army. Okay, now understand how traders gain so much power in India. How they gain so much power here? The answer lies in one clear strategy. Here is the conversation between the girl and the grandma. Grandma, she's asking that how did East India Company manage to conquer India? Here it is. So grandma is saying they did not do it overnight, or you cannot say it is a very sudden. It is something that is planned and strategic. So they were clever, pretending to be friendly, and entered in Indian politics. Then they use policies like divide and rule. So they know that if they want to conquer or they want to rule on our country, is through only divide and rule, not through power, you can say. So they encouraged rivalry between Indian rulers and supported one side against another. When king fought, they became weak, the Britishers became strong. They used policy called divide and rule to came into the power. Yes, students, this policy helped the British take control of India bit by bit without fighting a big war in the beginning. Now that we understand how Britishers control power or gain power in the India, our next topic will explain the major conflicts and battles that change Indian history forever, including the Battle of Plassey and the Battle of Buxar. First, we will see so from here we can say the real struggle began. By the mid-18th century, Bengal was the richest province of India. Its fertile land produced rice and sugar. Then, while its weavers were famous across the world for its fine silk and muslin, Bengal's Nawab, including Murshid Quli Khan, Ali Vardi Khan, and later Siraj-ud-Daulah. Here is the image of Siraj-ud-Daulah, and why we are focusing on this, we will just discuss further here. They wanted to keep their independence and limit the company's growing power. So Nawab complained that the company refused to pay tax, built fort without permissions, and disrespect Bengali authority. So actually the Bengal's Nawabs were not liking the behavior of Britishers and how they are interrupting in the internal affairs also, and without their permissions they are working. So why they are not liking the behavior of Britishers? Because when they came to India, the Britishers were very humble and they asked for everything to the rulers, asked to build a small plot to build a factory. But soon they built strong forts with guns, robbed, plundered and carried people into slavery without the permission of the rulers. So rulers, or we can say Nawabs, are also fed up from the Britishers. Soon, trade disagreements turned into political conflict, leading to one of the most important battles of Indian history. Now, here are the complaints of Nawabs. Then come to the Battle of Plassey. It is the most important battle in the history, we can say. So, here is the Robert Clive, image of Robert Clive. So, in 1756, young Siraj-ud-Daulah became Nawab of Bengal. As you have already seen Siraj-ud-Daulah here. Here is the Siraj-ud-Daulah and Robert Clive here. So, young Siraj-ud-Daulah became Nawab, and then he tried to stop the company's misuse of power. So company is misusing its power, but Sirajuddaula trying to stop them. He attacked the company's factory that is in Qasim Bazar here, and later captured Kolkata. The British responded by sending force under the Robert Clive. So on 23rd of June 1757, the two sides fought at Plassey. Siraj's army was huge, around 50,000, but Robert Clive had barely 3,000. As you are predicted that with one army there is 50,000 people, and with one army there is only 3,000 people. So you all are thinking that obviously the maximum number of people or soldiers will be win. But that is totally opposite because of the Siraj's commander, Sirajuddola's commander, his name is Mir Jafar. Here it is, Mir Jafar had secretly agreed to support the company in return that he will be the next Nawab. So even before the war, we can say, even before the battle, it is decided that it will be the ball in the court of Robert Clive or British East India Company. So here is the Mir Jafar who betrayed his own Nawab Sirajuddaulah. So students, after the Battle of Plassey, the British made Mir Jafar the Nawab, but Mir Jafar soon realized that the company expected him to act as a puppet. But he doesn't want to act as a puppet that whatever Britishers said to him, he will do it. He wants independence, he wants freedom. So when he tried to act independently, the British removed him and replaced him with his son-in-law. His name was Mir Qasim. As you see here, in the Battle of Buxar, Mir Jafar soon discovered that company wanted him as a puppet, and then Mir Qasim too wanted independence when he became the Nawab and joined forces with Sirajuddaulah, the Nawab of Awadh, Shah Alam II and the Mughal Emperor. In 1764, the combined force faced the company at Buxar in Bihar. This time, the disciplined and well-trained company's army defeated the large Indian force because there are so many people in the Mir Qasim's side. The victory was decisive. It proved that even alliance of powerful Indian rulers could not easily overthrow the company. Here is the picture of Nawab Mir Qasim. But all of these happened due to the one person, that is Mir Jafar, when he agreed to Britishers that he will not fight for Sirajuddaulah. Now come to, as you have already seen in video, even today the Mir Jafar is used in India as a synonym for traitor, as we have already discussed that thing. Now come to the why these battles changed everything. The victories at Plassey and Buxar changed the company's role in India forever. Once it had come as a humble trading organization, now it was a political power that could decide the fate of Nawabs and even force Mughal Emperor to grant its revenue rights. Now, first company came here as just as a traders. Now, after that, they become tax collector, administrator and rulers. The wealth of Bengal, land tax, trade profit, silk, textile income began flowing into the company's treasury. With this money, they built forts, trained soldiers, brought weapons and prepared further conquest. Here it is. But controlling Bengal was only the beginning. Other powerful states like Mysore, Marathas, Hyderabad and Punjab still remained outside the company's control. The British realized that they could not always depend on outright wars, which was costly and risky. That means if they war with everyone, that is very costly. All the expenses will go directly to the military. They don't left with anything. They don't left with any treasure. Instead, they needed political strategies that would give them influence without the expense of constant fighting. Now come to the expansion of company's rule. After securing the Diwani of Bengal in 1765, what is Diwani rights? In Diwani rights, Britishers directly take revenue from the regions, or you can say from the people of India. They can directly take the revenue or take the taxes. As earlier, the Nawabs, or we can say their commanders, take revenue from the people, but now they directly collect the revenue, that is Diwani rights. And they took Diwani right of Bengal in 1765. The East India Company grew from a trading body into political power. So, they are thinking that war is very costly. Let's come up to some strategies or tricks by they can control over the political power of the India. So the new method were devised to expand control. In 1798, Lord Wellesley, here's the picture, introduced the subsidiary alliance. What is subsidiary alliance? A system that appeared to protect Indian rulers, but in reality made them dependent. They had to accept British resident, disband their own army and pay heavily for company troops. If they failed, territory was taken away. The Nizam of Hyderabad was the first to sign, and soon many others followed. So historians have called this an empire on the cheap, since the British gained power without fighting constant wars. So Britishers want total control over the India. So they didn't stop here. They came up with another principle, that is paramountcy. Under the Lord Hastings, here is a picture of Lord Hastings, the British declared the principle of paramountcy, meaning their authority was supreme over all Indian rulers. This allowed them to annex and threaten to annex any Indian state. Using this idea, they fought several important wars with Tipu Sultan in Mysore, the Marathas in Western India, and finally the Sikhs in Punjab, all of whom were eventually defeated. So their agenda is they are very powerful, they are powerful more than the rulers already in the India. Now after that, they came up with the one more principle, that is doctrine of lapse. What is doctrine of lapse? Before that, let's see who introduced it. Lord Dalhousie, here's the picture from 1848 to 1856, who introduced the doctrine of lapse. According to this rule, if the king died without a biological son, his kingdom would lapse or be taken over by the company. That means he cannot adopt son for the next year for his empire or for the rule. Next, but the British refused to accept this. Indian traditions allowed adoption, but Britishers refused this because using this doctrine, states like Satara, Nagpur, Jhansi and later Awadh were annexed. What had begun as company of merchants had now become a true empire, using clever policies to swallow Indian kingdoms one by one. So here are some principles, or you can say how they expand their company rule in India, not by war but by the clever strategies, we can say. First is Diwani of Bengal, or we can say subsidiary alliance, then paramountcy, after that doctrine of lapse. Here is the expansion of British rule from 1797 to 1857. So in the yellowish, we can say areas under the British rule, and in pink areas not under the British rule. Now come to the case study of Rani Chennamma of Kittur. You have already seen Jhansi, Rani of Jhansi, Rani Lakshmi Bai. You have heard so many stories about her. But now in this case study, we will study Rani Chennamma of Kittur. So here is the ruler of Kittur dies in 1824 without a natural heir. The Queen Rani Chennamma adopts a son. The British East India Company refused to accept the adoption. Then Rani Chennamma gathers her force to fight. She confronted the company's troops, and in the first clash, inflicted a serious defeat. But the British soon sent heavy reinforcement. After the fierce struggle, Kittur is subdued. Rani Chennamma died in 1829, but her courage lives on. Now we will understand how Britishers expand their empire. Let's see how their rule affected the everyday life of Indians. First, colonial rule changed everything: the economy, the society, the agriculture, as well as education of the Indians. How people lived and survived here. One of the most tragic results of the British rule was the terrible famines in different parts of India. Now let's discuss the impact of colonial rule in India. When the Britishers established their rule in India, it was not only about controlling land and people, but also about reshaping the country's economy and society. Colonial policies touched every aspect of life, from how people earned their livelihood to how communities were organized. So first we will discuss devastating famines under colonial rule. Here is the image. You can see a contemporary cartoon depicting the Great Famine of Bengal. You can see the Indians here, how they are starving from hunger, and here are the Britishers. Now after the Battle of Plassey, 1757, the British East India Company gained the right to collect revenue from Bihar, Bengal and Orissa. These areas were once called the paradise of earth. Here it is. However, instead of investing in development, the company focused only on extracting maximum revenue. It means during the time of famine, instead of helping us, they are exploiting us, right? So between 1770 to 72, due to poor rainfall, Bengal faced terrible famine here. Farmers were forced to pay heavy land revenue even when their crops failed. As a result, nearly 1/3 of Bengal's population, about 10 million people, perished. Shockingly, the company did not lower revenue demands. In some cases, taxes were even increased. During the time of famine, they didn't even help us, as well as they increased the taxes in India. So you can already think about it, how Britishers exploit us during the time of famine also. Now, as a result, later the Great Famine stuck to Madras as well as the Deccan region, killing nearly 8 million people instead of helping. Okay students, now come to the British Viceroy Lord Lytton. Here is the picture of Lord Lytton. Followed a strict free market policy. What is free market policy? Which means the government refused to interfere in prices or provide food at affordable rates. Even or he organized a lavish Delhi Darbar in 1877 to celebrate Queen Victoria's proclamation as Empress of India, while famine deaths were at peak. You can say during the time period of famine, they are not even helping us, even they are spending our revenue, or you can say spending our tax on the celebration of Queen Victoria. Now come to the case study here of a true voice from Great Famine 1876 to 78. In Madras Presidency during the Great Famine, William Digby, here is the portrait, or you can say image of the William Digby, a British journalist and relief worker. He traveled across so many regions during the time period of famine. He later wrote about what he saw. He saw that people lying by roadside, mere skeletons, their lips too dry to cry. Mothers sat beside the bodies of their children, too weak even to cover them with earth. Some had walked for miles to the famine camps, only to collapse at the gate. You can say when people came at the gate of the camps, they died before that. One report from Bareilly district, present-day Karnataka, recorded how a man named Rahman, once a small farmer, lost his entire family during the time period of famine. You can see the pictures here. Rice bag destined for export stacked on Madras beaches during the famine. Next picture illustrating from the London news depicting people in Bangalore waiting for famine relief. You can see that picture and see how people are so malnourished, and here the Britishers stocking, or you can say store the food and give it to the people in a very high price. Now come to the hardship and hunger in colonial times. The British administration did open famine relief camps, but they were too few and poorly supplied. Rations were deliberately kept low because officials feared that too much help would make the poor dependent. The Famine Commission of 1878 to 80 even stated. Here is the map. You can see this map showing major famines in India during British rule during the time period of 1765 to 1947. You can see many regions here. Many regions here marked again and again. Famine was not natural. It is caused by British economic policies that ignored Indian lives. After the famine, Indian leaders noticed that how Britishers are exploiting us and how they are taking away our wealth. So now come to the topic drain of wealth during the colonial times. Dadabhai Naoroji, known as the Grand Old Man of India, explained the progress through what came to be called drain of wealth. In his famous book, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, Naoroji argued that India was not poor because of its people, but because the wealth they created was taken away from them. He estimated that nearly 30 to 40 crore left India every year. Instead of being spent on irrigation, famine relief or schools, this money financed Britain's industries, railways, telegraph system, even wars outside the India. You can say instead of helping Indians, Britishers are helping themselves, as well as they are spending our money on war outside. They are fighting with other countries. Now come to another historian, R.C. Dutt. In his book, Economic History of India showed how heavy land revenue demands destroyed farmers and forced them into debt. He compared Indian peasant to men who had to sell their grain to pay taxes while their own children starved. Now come to the William Digby, a British writer, also admitted that while Britain prospered, India sank into misery and famine. Even within Britain, some critics noted the unfairness. Now come to the Dadabhai Naoroji himself was elected as the first Indian member of parliament in 1892, where he boldly raised the issue. He described British as un-British because it betrayed the very principle of justice and fairness Britain claimed to uphold. Now come to the long-term impact of the drain. The long-term consequences of the drain were devastating. India, one of the richest economy you can say, was slowly reduced to poverty. Farmers lost their lives after paying high revenue. Artisans and weavers could not compete with cheap machine-made British imports. Industries collapsed. Famine became more frequent and deadly because the money that could have been used for relief was being diverted abroad. So here is the impact of drain of wealth in our society. Dadabhai Naoroji played a very important role to educate, or you can say to tell about the drain of wealth, how our wealth is going to another country and it is not helping us, it is helping them only. Now come to the modern research has shown the staggering scale of exploitation. Economist Utsa Patnaik estimated that between 1765 and 1938, the British drained nearly 45 trillion US dollars in today's value from India. The sum 13 times greater than Britain's economy in 2023. You can now think about it, how much wealth they drained from our country. Now come to the decline of traditional Indian industries. Before colonial rule, India was one of the world's leading producer of textile. The fine muslin of Dhaka, colorful chintz of Coromandel coast, Banarsi silks were prized across Asia and Europe. Indian artisans also produce high-quality iron, steel and paper. You can see the pictures of muslin, chintz and Banarsi silk. Now come to the Governor Bentinck said that the bones of the cotton weavers are bleaching the plains of India. That is written by, or you can say that statement is given by the Governor General William Bentinck. India's share in the world economy kept shrinking. From being one of the richest land, it became one of the poorest by the time of independence. So according to William Bentinck, he means that Indian weavers were suffering from extreme poverty. Now come to the loss of traditional governance. Here is the picture of Charles Metcalfe. He said Indian villages were little republics, or earlier Indian villages were self-governed. Even they managed their own local disputes, irrigation, as well as for the welfare of the community. Regional kingdoms had administrative systems built over centuries, adapted to local needs. The Britishers replaced these systems with courts and taxes controlled by officials. As a result, people lost their voice and unity. Now come to the transformation of Indian education under the British. Before the coming of the British, India had a rich and diverse education system. In villages, Pathshala and madrasas provided basic learnings. Children were taught reading, writing, arithmetic, philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and practical skills. Instruction was given in Sanskrit, Persian, Arabic, and regional languages. Learning was very flexible. There is no specific curricula or formal examination. India was also home to great centers of learning such as Nalanda and Takshila. which attracts scholars from across the Asia. Education was not just about books, but also about ethics, disciplines, and life skill. Now here is ruins of Nalanda University and Takshila University. You can see the images here. But when the Britishers took control, they wanted a very different kind of education, one that would help them strengthen their power. Here is a debate of Indian education, Calcutta, 1835. Here is the debate on Indian education, Kolkata, 1835, between Orientalist and Anglicist. Their ideology is very different. Orientalists believe that they wanted education in Sanskrit, Arabian and Persian, as well as they believe in knowledge, literature and science and culture were vulnerable. Now come to Anglicist. Anglicist idea, or you can say ideology, is believed that they support the English language, as well as they believe that European knowledge was superior. Here is most powerful comment from the Anglicist that a single shelf of good European library is worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. That means, by saying this, he meant that Indian knowledge is useless and the only European education was valuable. He also said that education should be created. A class of Indians, English is a taste, in opinion, in morals. This means Indians who thought just like the British. Let's now see what changes were brought in after the debate. Now come to the Macaulay's Minute. Thomas Babington Macaulay, in his famous Minute on Indian Education, declared, first, European language was superior to Indian learning. Government funds should only support English education. Then English should replace Persian as an official language. Next, the aim was to create a class of Indians, English in taste, in opinion, and in morals. This decision marked a turning point. Traditional systems were sidelined and English became a language of power, jobs, and prestige. So according to Macaulay, according to him, that English is the only language that is powerful and other languages are useless. Now come to the Wood's Dispatch of 1854, known as a Magna Carta of English education in India. This dispatch laid down a detailed plan. Universities were to be set up in Kolkata, Bombay, Madras, established in 1857. Teacher training college were to be created. Departments of education were opened in each province. A regular curriculum and examination system was introduced by Charles Wood. Now come to the Hunter Commission. Here is the picture of William Wilson Hunter. A British later realized that education had reached only a small elite. The Hunter Commission recommended more focus on primary education in local language, development of vocational and technical training, and better training of teachers. So these type of vocational courses that we are seeing today is during that time William Hunter introduced. Now come to the impact of British education. British education had both bad and good impact in the Indian society. Here are the positive and some are the negatives of the British education. New ideas of science, modern subject and rational thinking. These are some of the positive changes in the British education. Universities were created. Social reformers emerged who fought against the practices like sati and child marriage, spread nationalism and awareness, helping them freedom movements. Then there are the negative effects was far more significant and long-lasting. Traditional system of learning in Sanskrit, Persian and regional languages were undermined, then resulting in the decline of India's rich indigenous knowledge, tradition. Education was limited mostly to the urban elites. Next, deep social inequality increased during the time period of British education. Then people began to feel that the Indian knowledge was inferior. Now, so even though British education looked modern, it mainly helped the British maintain control over the Indians. Now come to the reshaping India's economy to suit colonial needs. When the British established political control over India, they also reshaped its economy to serve the interest of their empire. India was turned into a supplier of raw material and a market for finished goods. The traditional balance between agriculture, craft, trade was deliberately disrupted to benefit British industries. There is farmers who pushed to grow cash crops like cotton, indigo, jute, tea, coffee, opium that the British industries required. Heavy revenue systems such as permanent and Royatwari system were designed to secure colonial income, not improve agricultural life. So everything they have done, in fact, in terms of education or in terms of tax or in terms of permanent settlement, Royatwari system or any policy, they made for their own benefit, not for the Indians. Indian handicraft and traditional industries, once renowned worldwide, could not survive against British policies. Indian goods faced high duties in Britain, while British machine-made textile entered India freely. Then the railway and telegraph are often described as colonial gifts, but they were built mainly for the British convenience. When Britishers came up with the idea of railways and telegraph, that is not for the Indians or the welfare of the Indians, that is only for the purpose of trade and communication, easier for the Britishers only, so that they export more and more or they can drain more and more revenue from the India. Now come to the next. Here is the British Railway and Telegraph, you can see in the pictures. Now come to the next topic, that is early challenges to British rule. Okay students, Britishers think that if Indians accept their rule, then they have to accept it for forever. But that is completely wrong. From the very beginning, many groups across India like peasants, you can say tribals, religious leaders, soldiers began to resist. These early protests were small and scattered, but they showed one powerful message, that is, Indians were never willing to stay silent under the foreign rule. Now, here is from the very beginning of British rule, various sections of Indian society, as we have already studied, these early changes to British authority took different forms and originated from various regions. Now, first of all, here is the sculpture of Sannyasi Fakir, rebellion at Maitre Park in Delhi. One of the first organized uprising came from unexpected group is Hindu, here it is, Hindu Sannyasi and Muslim Fakirs. Hindu Sannyasi and Muslim Fakirs, one of the first organizing fight against the British. These were religious people who had given up worldly life to focus on spirituality. Surprisingly, these peaceful religion figures picked up weapons to fight the British. So the trouble started when British began to controlling the tribal people, or you can say the religious group in the religious people. Sannyasi and fakirs traditionally traveled freely across the Bengal and the other regions, visiting holy places, collecting donations from devotees. The British saw them as a troublemaker, and Britishers stopped them, as well as started taxing pilgrims who wanted to visit religious sites. The British also harassed these religious leaders, and fed up of Britishers, and then Hindu and Muslim communities both are very angered on Britishers, and they unite and fought against the Britishers. This movement, or you can say this rebellion, is led by the leader Manju Shah. Thousands of sannyasis, fakirs formed armed groups. They attacked British officers, stole money from the government treasury, targeted land laborers who supported the British. What made them difficult to catch was their fighting style, because they are using the tactics that Shivaji was using in the previous chapter, that is guerrilla warfare. They use the tactic of sudden attacks, then disappear into the forest. That's why the attack is very surprising, and Britishers did not catch them easily. Now come to the tribal uprising. The tribal community living in Indians' forest and hills faced severe problems because of British policy. Here you can see the map of major tribal revolts during British rule: Kol Rebellion, Santhal Rebellion, Munda Rebellion, and Kumaon Revolt. The British changed the traditional way in which tribals lived, owned land, and used resources. This led to several tribal revolts. As like we have seen from the sannyasis, they are also, you can say, they are also harassing the tribal groups of the region. First is the Kol uprising 1831 to 32. The Kol tribe lived in Chota Nagpur region, that is in Deccan Plateau area in the present day Jharkhand. For generations, they had their own way of governing themselves and owning land collectively. The Britishers completely ignored these traditions. They introduced zamindari system here, which meant that outsider, mostly Hindu landlord from the plains, became the owner of tribal land. So before the zamindari system, tribals are the leader of their own land. But now, after the zamindari system, some from the other region came to their place and now become the leader of their land, you can say. The tribals suddenly became tenant of their own ancestral land. These new landlords demand high tax, treated the tribal badly. British officials and Christian missionaries also tried to change tribal custom, convert them to Christianity. This rebellion is under the leadership of Buddho Bhagat. The Kols decided to fight back. They attacked police station, government buildings, the house of landlords. The rebellion quickly spread to the thousands of the Kol people, and Kol people joined this fight. The British had sent a large army to crush this uprising. Many Kol leaders were killed and imprisoned. This situation even became worse after rebellion failed. After the Kol uprising, now we come to the Santhal rebellion. Here is an Indian postal stamp depicting Sidhu and Kanhu. Now we will study about them. The Santhal were a large tribal group living in area that are now part of Jharkhand. That is also the tribal community, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Orissa. Their rebellion was one of the biggest tribal uprising in the history against the Britishers. The Santhal faced multiple problems. The British land policy made them lose their traditional rights over their land. Moneylenders charged them very high interest rate. When they could not pay back loans, their land were taken away. The British court did not understand and respect tribal communities or customs. Here are the four brothers: Sidhu, Kanhu, Chand, Bhairav. These four led the Santhal rebellion. They declared that they were the real rulers of their land. They would drive away the British officials, landlords, moneylenders who exploited them. Now Santhal fought back very courageously, believed that their God would protect them from the British bullet. They destroyed railway lines, attacked government buildings, offices, killed many British officials. However, the British declared martial law and sent a huge army against the Santhal tribe. Thousands of Santhal died in the fighting. The rebellion was crushed, but it forced the British to create a separate administrative area called Santhal Parganas and give some recognition to tribal rights. Here is the picture of Santhal tribe, how they are fighting to the Britishers. Now come to the peasant uprising, the Indigo Rebellion, 1859 to 1860. First, Indian farmers suffered a lot because the Britishers asked them to grow indigo. Again and again, one of the most famous peasant uprising was the Indigo Rebellion in Bengal. The problem with indigo was a plant used to make blue dye. Here it is, dyeing clothes with indigo plants, which was very valuable in Europe for coloring clothes. Europe planters set up indigo factories in Bengal, forced local farmers to grow indigo based on food crops. The planters used a system where they gave loan to farmers and then forced to grow indigo on the best land. The farmers received very low price for their indigo, often less than the cost they occurred to grow it. This system is called Tinkathya. Growing indigo damaged soil, making it difficult to grow food crops. Later, many farmers fell into debt and lost their lands. Now come to the farmers' resistance. The Indigo Rebellion began in the village of Govindpur in Nadia district, led by the Digambar Viswas. The farmer refused to grow indigo because their soil was damaging for the European planters. They organized strikes, resisted orders, even attacked the indigo factories. What made this movement different was to support it received from the educated Bengalis. Newspaper reported on the cruelty of the planters. A famous play called Neel Darpan, The Mirror of Indigo, showed the suffering of peasants. Then the British government set up an Indigo Commission to inquire into the planters' action. This system of forced indigo cultivation was stopped, marking a great victory for the farmers. Here is the cover page of English translation Neel Darpan, The Mirror of Indigo. And here you can see the dyeing clothes with indigo plants. Now come to the Great Rebellion of 1857. You can say this is the time period. The 1857 is the time period from where we can say resistance or revolt against the Britishers started. Historians has assigned different name to this event. 1857, the British described it as a Sepoy Mutiny, as many of the first rebels were Indian soldiers. Indian historians have called it the Great Rebellion or the First War of Independence. Now come to the major causes of rebellion of 1857. First we have is political cause. As we have already studied, so many policies were implemented on the Indian rulers by the Britishers to annex the kingdom. Due to the doctrine of lapse, subsidiary alliance, paramountcy, Indian rulers were losing their power and privileges, humiliation faced by the Mughal and Peshwa families. Next come to the economic cause. Heavy land revenue imposed on peasants, Indian craft destroyed by import of cheap British goods, farmers forced to grow indigo and cash crops, drain of wealth to Britain. Next come to the social cause. Britishers interference in Indian custom and traditions, Western education reforms imposed on society, laws like Widow Remarriage Act views as attack on tradition. As we can say, it is a very good reform of that time, but Britishers were changing our customs, our traditions, and enforcing us to, and they were spreading Christianity on us. Next is religion and culture. Fear of conversion to Christianity and missionary activities encouraged by the Britishers. And last is the military. Indian soldiers subjected to lower pay, inferior status than British, opportunities for promotion denied to sepoys, harsh punishment and discipline enforced in the army. By 1850, resistment against British rule had already grown among kings, peasants, tribal soldiers due to political annexation, heavy taxes, loss of livelihood, and interference in social religious customs. This unrest turned into open rebellion with the introduction of Enfield rifle. That is the very important cause of 1857, that is immediate cause. In this cause, there is cartridge, you can say there is rifle, and in that rifle there is a cartridge, and that is rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat. So cow is very holy and sacred to the Hindus, and pig is, you can say, haram in Muslims. So that had to be bitten to open that cartridge. So gunpowder is poured into the rifle and then it will be shoot. So here is that is the major cause, you can say, of the revolt 1857. Now come to the spread of the rebellion. In Meerut on 10th May 1857, the soldiers who had already refused to use the new rifle cartridge finally rose in open revolt. They attacked their British officers, released fellow soldiers who had been imprisoned for disobedience, and set fire to British building. From Meerut, the revolt, or you can say sepoys, marched to Delhi. They appealed to Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, to become their leader, because they do not have any leader and they want one person who lead them. Though elderly and frail, his acceptance gave the rebellion a powerful symbol. By railing under the Mughal emperor's name, the rebels gained a sense of unity and legitimacy. Then it went to Kanpur. Nana Sahib, the adopted son of last Peshwa, led the rebels. He declared himself the Peshwa and was supported by his commander Tatya Tope, who became one of the most determined fighters of the revolt. Next come to the Lucknow. Awadh resentment had been strong ever since the annexation of kingdom. Here Begum Hazrat Mahal took charge and led the defense of the city against the British force. Here is the map of important centers of revolt 1857. You can see here the main centers of the revolt and other centers of the revolt: Meerut, Delhi, Bareilly, Faizabad, Lucknow, Kanpur, Jhansi. These are the main centers of the revolt 1857. Now come to the Jhansi. Here Rani Lakshmi Bai, as you already know, emerged as a heroic leader, refusing to give up her kingdom under the doctrine of lapse. She fought fiercely, joined forces with Tatya Tope and captured the fort of Gwalior before being killed in battle in 1858. Then Bihar. In Bihar, the revolt was led by Kunwar Singh, an aged landlord of Jagdishpur. Despite being nearly 80 years old, he displayed remarkable courage and inspired peasants and soldiers alike to rise against British. Next, here is the biggest question: is why the rebellion failed? What is the reason that the rebellion is failed? Because after after it is arising in Bihar, Jhansi, Lucknow, Kanpur, Delhi, Meerut, still it failed because there are the reason it was mainly limited to northern and central India. Rebels in different regions could not coordinate their action. We can say there is no unity between the rulers. The British had stronger armies, better weapons, quicker communication through telegraphs, and the rulers still have the traditional way of fighting in wars. Several Indian princes, chiefs and landlords supported the British instead of joining the rebels. So these are the reasons why the rebellion failed. Now come to the aftermath. Even though the rebellion failed, it had major consequences. The East India Company's rule ended and India came under the direct control of British Crown. The British became more conscious in interfering with Indian customs and worked to win the support of princes and landlords. For Indians, 1857 remained a powerful symbol of unity and courage. It showed that people from different backgrounds could come together against foreign rule and inspired future generation of freedom fighters. Here is the revolt or heroes of revolt 1857. First we have Rani Lakshmi Bai, then Begum Hazrat Mahal, Mangal Pandey, Nana Sahib and Tatya Tope, and Kunwar Singh, Bahadur Shah Zafar. These are the people who were the heroes of Revolt 1857. As we have already seen there, what they have done in which region. In 1857, Rani Lakshmi Bai refused to surrender Jhansi to British rule. Begum Hazrat Mahal, in 1858, Awadh was annexed by British. She opposed the injustice. Then Mangal Pandey, Sepoy at Gorakhpur, who attacked British officers in protest against greased Carthage. That immediate cause we have studied. Then Nana Sahib, he was the adopted son and took leadership of the revolt in Kanpur. Then Tatya Tope against the doctrine of lapse. Kunwar Singh in Bihar, brilliant tactician despite age, wounded in battle. Legends say he cut off his injured arm and offered it to the Ganga. Then Bahadur Shah Zafar, last Mughal emperor, symbolic leader of the revolt. Next we have the timeline of the whole colonial period in India. Then is the impact of Europeans in colonialism of Indian society. Now come to the impact of European colonialism on Indian society. The conquest and rule of India by Europeans, especially British, was not a civilizing mission. Then what it is? This is not a civilizing mission. We are already civilized. So, we already have philosophy, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, literature. Colonial rule was essentially a process of subjugation and exploitation carried out with violence and repression whenever necessary. Then, European powers expanded their empires by extracting resources, uprooting local communities, and imposing foreign goods. Now come to the documenting India, knowledge and control. At the same time, colonial rule left behind some unintended legacies. The British, and to the smaller extent the French, were systematic in recording and studying India. They carried out geographical surveys, ethnographic studies and census operations. They documented monuments, temples, mosques, forts, sometimes even restoring ancient ruins. This led to the beginning of modern archaeology and study of India's past. Then, this knowledge often served colonial interest. At the same time, thousands of artifacts, including statues, manuscripts, paintings, jewelries, were looted from India and sent to European museums or private collections. Debate about bringing back the stolen treasures such as Kohinoor diamond and Amravati sculpture back to India. Here are the Kohinoor diamond, Amravati marble, Sultanganj Buddha, Tipu's mechanical tiger. Now, last topic we have Sanskrit and the West. Another legacy of colonialism was spread of Indian knowledge abroad. The British scholar Charles Wilkins produced the first English translation of Bhagavad Gita in 1785. Soon, German, French, and other European scholars followed. Some admired Indian philosophy and literature. The German thinker Max Muller translated the Rig Veda and praised India's intellectual knowledge and traditions. Used this translation to argue that Christianity and Western thought were superior. And last, the influence of Indian thought reached far beyond. European philosophers like George Hegel considered the study of Sanskrit text as a discovery of new world. Later, Indian spiritual tradition inspired Americans such as Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. In 19th century, while colonialism imposed political domination, cultural influence often followed in the opposite direction, with Indian texts shape global literature and philosophy. In last, we say that Britishers came here to civilize Indians or the regions they colonized, but in real they came here to exploit the colonized countries. So we can say they did not came here to civilize us, they came here just to exploit us. And you remember the theory of drain of wealth, how they drain our wealth from India to his own country for their own benefits. Thank you for watching the lecture. See you in the next class.